In a way, a dictator is quite similar to a patriarch, but on a much larger scale. Instead of just taking care of a family, a dictator has to take care of an entire empire. Dictators in history are often labeled as being extreme in their methods of rule. But there's also a lot of debate arguing that they were talented, decisive leaders, and that the history of that era required them to become dictators. There was no other way. So today we're going to talk about the dictators I've researched. This video isn't meant to be a political judgment. All the information we present is referenced from online sources and may contain many errors. So if there's anything wrong or if anything needs correcting, please feel free to comment below. First off, let's talk about what a dictator is. You could say a dictator is someone who holds absolute power unrestricted by any real constitution. I'm emphasizing those last words because this is an extremely important factor, but one that few people seem to pay attention to. There's another characteristic that also needs to be noted. A dictator will suppress opposing factions and rule by force combined with decrees. We understand what force means. As for decrees, they're almost like laws, but they can be applied immediately without any review period or the necessary steps required when enacting a law. And finally, wherever there's a dictator, there's no democracy, no freedom of speech or a free press. But we also need to be clear that freedom of speech doesn't mean you can just say whatever you want. It's not about being able to say anything that affects others. It's about being allowed to express your opinions and views in a civilized manner. Okay, that's enough rambling. Now we'll start with our first figure, Qin Shi Huang. Qin Shi Huang's real name was Ying Zheng. He was the first emperor in Chinese history known as the #1 feudal tyrant. This guy was born during the Warring States period, a time known as the contention of the 7 states. He was the leader of the state of Qin. He defeated the other 6 states, Han, Zhao, Wei, Chu, Yan, and Qi, one by one, unifying all of China and seizing power. The first thing this guy did was prepare his troops for campaigns of conquest. And Ying Zheng spent 10 years adding the achievement of wiping out the 6 surrounding states to his profile, and after that he unified China. Afterwards, Ying Zheng, proud of his achievement, placed himself above the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. And he called himself emperor with the self-proclaimed title of Shi Huangdi, or first emperor. The word Sha here means first, as in the first emperor. And with absolute power in his hands, the first thing Qin Shi Huang did was abolish the feudal system of enfeoffment. Enfeoffment meant allowing someone to rule a region on their own to do whatever they wanted as long as they paid tribute annually and were obedient. Qin Shi Huang and his crew believed this was the very seed of chaos. After spending a whole decade gathering everything into one pile to then break it up and grant it to feudal lords would be no different than giving hostile forces a chance to reset the game. And so Qin Shi Huang divided the entire territory into 36 commanderies. As brutal as he was, Qin Shi Huang still left behind many great works and legacies from his era. For China, besides unifying the territory, this guy also helped unify the written script nationwide. Then he unified the systems of measurement and currency and even standardized the length of cart axles and built systems of canals and roads. As for the world, this guy left behind the Great Wall. As the name suggests, it is a very long wall, tens of thousands of miles long. Specifically, it's 21,196 kilometers, which is to say very long. We might talk about it in a video about the 7 wonders of the world. But there's another even more incredible structure, which is the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang. To be more accurate, it's basically a feudal-era resort. To build this resort for himself after he died, Qin Shi Huang mobilized over 700,000 people who worked continuously for 38 years to complete it. Even today's capitalists would have to call him boss. In this tomb, there isn't just Qin Shi Huang's body, but also numerous chambers along with gold, silver, and precious gems buried inside the mausoleum. But most famous of all has to be the terracotta army of up to several thousand soldiers, along with war horses, chariots, and all that. This was probably so that even after he died, he could still be a king, still have people to command, and all that. But what's more brutal is that after the tomb was completed, Qin Shi Huang ordered the execution of everyone who had built it. And with hundreds of thousands of people building this tomb, you can probably guess how many of them had to die here. Throughout his life, Qin Shi Huang was always searching for immortality. This guy sent people everywhere to find elixirs and a premium version of anti-aging herbs. Then some damn fool tricked him into chugging mercury, and just like that, he was gone. After Qin Shi Huang passed away because he was hated by so many people, a few of his trusted officials kept his death a secret for a full 2 months to buy time to prepare for the coming rebellions. It got to the point where the king's corpse was rotting and stinking, so they had to carry a cart of rotting fish alongside it to fool everyone. But once the news of the king's death got out, sure enough, many rebellious forces rose up. Overall, Qin Shi Huang was brilliant, but he was so brutal that he was hated. Speaking of dictators, everyone knows about this particular artist. The leader of the fascist faction, the man who started World War II, who possessed an absolutely insane kill count, mostly consisting of Jewish people. And the most intense part was his order for the genocide of the Jewish people, simply because the guy felt like it, and so more than 6 million Jewish people were executed, becoming the bloodiest massacre in human history. Following the fascist ideology that Hitler always pursued, he launched a war against the world along with his allies Japan and Italy. This crew was pretty dangerous and aggressive. They managed to conquer most of Europe, but in the end, they were defeated by the Allies. Hitler was cornered and ultimately committed suicide in his bunker. Mussolini. If in soccer we have the atomic trios like MSN or BBC, then in World War II we also had an atomic trio for the fascist faction, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And Benito Mussolini was the fascist boss of Italy at the time, one half of a deadly duo with the German fascist Adolf Hitler. He was also the one who launched and led the very first fascist movement in Europe. Basically, this guy gave birth to fascism. Hitler was the one who made it famous. According to some sources I've read, Mussolini rose to prominence thanks to Italy's chaotic political climate. In the post-World War I era, he had once dodged military service and actively opposed Italian imperialism. And gradually he came to support nationalism, which was the very foundation for fascism later on. In March of 1919, Mussolini founded this thing. The name's a bit hard to read. It's called the Italian Combat Squad. This was the organization created to connect the victory at Vittorio Veneto with fascist doctrine. Under his leadership, Mussolini caused the National Fascist Party, or PNF, to continue its terrifying growth. And the capitalist business owners quite liked this guy, because they believed Mussolini would be the solution to prevent a communist revolution. Then in 1922, when a rather large-scale general strike was organized, Mussolini seized the opportunity, ordering his men to take control of many cities, setting the stage for a march to stage a coup. The government saw this and got pretty scared, so they had to consider compromising with Mussolini, promising him power and all that. Mussolini was appointed prime minister by the king, which paved the way for him to begin seizing absolute power. And amidst the country's political turmoil, the lower house approved 1 year of emergency powers for him, and just like that, Mussolini gained the momentum to control Italy. From then on, for the next 10 years, he continued to expand his control, gradually dismantling the democratic system. Then he built up his personal image, and all that calling himself Il Duce, meaning the leader of Italy. After successfully taking over Italy, he launched a brutal war against the territory of Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. Then on one fateful occasion in 1936, Mussolini collaborated with Adolf Hitler. Finally, they added Emperor Hirohito to the mix, forming the atomic trio of the fascist faction. And because he was best buds with Hitler, he also applied anti-Jewish laws in Italy, just to keep up with his friend. In 1940, Mussolini declared war on Britain and France, dragging all of Italy into World War II. And as we all know, Italy had many options, but they were all losing ones. The fascist faction was completely defeated, and Mussolini himself was executed. And his body was taken to Milan and hung upside down in the square for public display. Wow. The typical ending for fascist dictators. Okay, so those were the recent guys over in Europe. Mao Zedong. From an Eastern perspective, Mao Zedong is often seen as a leader who made many contributions and left behind a great legacy. In China, they still hang pictures of Chairman Mao as a great leader. But from a Western perspective, Mao Zedong is considered a dictator whose flawed decisions led to severe consequences. Mao Zedong once participated in the May 4th movement, which was an anti-imperialist student movement that was extremely popular at the time. At the same time, this guy was also one of the founders of the Communist Party of China. At first, Mao Zedong followed Marxism-Leninism, but later he developed it into Maoism. Basically, it emphasizes the role of the peasantry in the revolution. Mao's political and military career was also quite fiery. It started with the Autumn Harvest Uprising, which he led in 1927, followed by the Long March. I heard this was a great strategic military retreat by the Communist Party of China directed by Mao Zedong. With this success, Mao's position as the supreme leader was elevated to a new level. Then during the war against Japan, Mao's Communist Party of China teamed up with Chiang Kai-shek's Kuomintang to resist the Japanese. And after they were done fighting, the Japanese, those two turned around and immediately started fighting each other. In the end, the Communist Party won and established the People's Republic of China. And Mao Zedong became the chairman. His reputation as a dictator also started from here. In addition, Mao Zedong had two policies that were heavily criticized: the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. The Great Leap Forward basically was Mao's plan to accelerate industrial development, especially steel. And he believed that with the capabilities of the peasants, China could achieve this goal. But the problem was it wasn't a very good plan. Even those who thought it wasn't a good plan didn't dare to speak up because there had been a lot of suppression before that. As a result, the steel produced by the Chinese people was of terrible quality. Industry was underdeveloped and agriculture was also largely neglected, as most resources had been diverted to steel production. Then on top of that, there were natural disasters and crop failures that year, leading to the horrific famine of 1959. And the result was that more than 20 million people starved to death, millions became beggars, and human trafficking exploded, among other things. This can be considered China's greatest disaster of the 20th century. And the Great Leap Forward became the Great Leap Backward. The second thing was the Cultural Revolution movement. Basically, this Mao Zedong guy wanted to eradicate old cultural ideas, customs, and traditions and get rid of superstitious beliefs. And people also say that it was also aimed at carrying out political purges, labeling anyone who opposed him as a reactionary. And turning every word Mao said into absolute truth through this book. It's called the Little Red Book, probably because it's little and it's red. But to be fair, Mao Zedong was still a reformer who contributed to making China what it is today. The policies may have been harsh, the decisions may have been wrong, but they helped China break out of the vicious cycle of the old era. The only catch was the high human cost. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un. I'm going to group these three together because all three are from the same Kim family, and they are the ones who hold absolute power in North Korea through a system of hereditary succession. It sounds pretty bizarre that North Korea, which was a socialist country, would grant absolute power to a single individual or a family like the Kims. I read that it is a socialist regime based on the ideology of Kim Il-sungism, also known as the ideology of Kim Il-sung. He was the one who established the dictatorial regime in North Korea. Specifically after World War II, the Korean peninsula was divided into North Korea and South Korea. South Korea is modern-day South Korea, while North Korea is, well, North Korea. At the time, Kim Il-sung was the leader of North Korea with the backing of the Soviet Union. After coming to power, his next step was to go to war to unify the country. Kim Il-sung launched a war against South Korea, but after 3 years of fighting, there were wins and losses on both sides. In the end, it was a stalemate, so both sides decided on a ceasefire, and the country remains divided to this day. Although he didn't achieve a complete victory, he still considered it a success since he maintained control over the North. After that, North Korea began to be built upon the Juche ideology, which is considered an ideology of self-reliance independent of outside powers. This Juche ideology called for all citizens to place their absolute trust in the words of the Workers' Party of Korea. And Kim Il-sung also began to consolidate absolute power for his own family. He did this by carrying out purges and eliminating political rivals, thereby becoming the supreme leader of North Korea. True to the ideology he pursued, North Korea operated on a self-sufficient basis, disconnected from the outside world both economically and socially. The media was extremely heavily censored, and only one state-run television channel was allowed to operate. Any information, ideas, or viewpoints considered detrimental to the ruling party were banned and eliminated. As a result, the people only knew what they were told, and they weren't allowed to see anything else. And naturally, the outside world also had very murky information about the situation inside North Korea. That's because any information that was released was very limited, and most of it was just information beneficial to the ruling party. This dynastic political regime was passed down from the father Kim Il-sung to the son Kim Jong-il, and finally to Kim Jong-un. And there are still a few more names, but I'm a little lazy, and besides, reading all this takes too much time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. Goodbye and see you again.